I came in one day, April 11th, to work that morning. Then the world kind of caved in. And that's when we had the fire. We've started up again, and now, 2025, 3 years later, we are starting to get to what I imagined where we would be at in 2020 if we hadn't have had the pandemic and the fire. So it's been that kind of a recovery, but we're there. My name is Jason Gallop. I am the Watchmaker founder of Roldorf Co. When I was 17, I went to school in London with the British Horological Institute. So at that point, there was a college there called Hackney College. It was the only place in the South that actually trained watchmakers. The school there was amazing. I started working for Rolex, and while I was working for Rolex, I went out to Switzerland and went to WASTER, the Watchmakers of Switzerland Training and Education Program. And that's where I met Antoine Simonin, who just recently passed away. My journey has been quite bizarre, because at the end of the 80s, when I came out here, Vancouver was very much a different place, and it was almost like there wasn't really much of a watch community here. It was all still very nascent. Stores that were around were selling, the usual suspects, and information took a long time to come from Europe to Vancouver. And no internet at that time either, so it was all mail correspondence or fax. My father was a goldsmith. He had a thriving business in the UK, but he had been mugged one too many times, right? That was again going back to that whole what London was, very more of a brutal place, the end of 70s, 80s, and stuff like that, Brixton riots. While I was at the BHI, I traveled over to the US for a break in the summer. I'd never been outside of England, really. So when I came back all starry-eyed and started to have these conversations with my father, it reignited a flame that he had for leaving the UK. And it ended up feeling like I was drop-shipped in Vancouver. So, yeah, an interesting thing about that was, though, that I left all my friends there. I had made, as a young watchmaker, a lot of friends that I still speak to today, but it was a real strain on the relationship because I'm not a letter writer. Gradually, we started to get back in touch again when things started to normalize with the internet, right? In the sort of late 90s. So it was about 10 years, and I hadn't traveled home for 10 years. And now I'm just so thankful for the fact that I have kept up with those friends, because, they've been an inspiration for me. And Roldorf is what it is, I think, because of that influence, and also probably because of myself growing up in the industry with my father being a very down-to-earth goldsmith, very humble beginnings, that I see I see the world of watches and haute couture in a very, very different way. I started off by doing piecework for people, down to different jewelers saying, hey, I'm a watchmaker. Some of the larger places around the province of British Columbia. And so people were sending in packages of watches for me to service. And I had an office, not that dissimilar to this one, where I had set up a bench, and that's what I was doing. That's really when Roldorf became Roldorf. How did Roldorf become street level? My father had opened up a store in the Bentel Centre on Broad Street, below 4 to 5 office towers. And he became very well known there. And that was his place. I never really worked for him, you know. When he passed away fairly unexpectedly, he had just completed a brand new lease for this unit that he was in. I had just finished university. I could just see opportunity. So I took his goldsmithing business, and because I'm not a goldsmith, I couldn't repair a chain if my life depended on it. In the background, I could see that there was this massive movement for independent watchmaking. Looking at what my friends were doing, that's where the real inspiration came to then take brands that people didn't really know and bring them into Vancouver. One of the first brands that I took on was my friend Peter Speak. Now, Peter Speak used to be called Peter Speak Marin, and Speak Marin was his watch company. Watching his rise and his passion, and then Stephen Forsey, who had started Global Forsey, a rather prolific company in Switzerland. Gastown started in 2020. I had realized that I had outgrown the space in the Bentel Centre that was my father's. I've always loved Gastown. I've loved its heritage. I love its grittiness. The diversity of Gastown is just amazing. Again, I didn't want an area that was pretentious, where I was around boutiques and stuff like that. That was a very conscious thing. I had signed the lease in February of that year to move in at the mid-March, going from that 350 square foot space into 1,000 square foot space. It really drove my vision. So we opened really at the beginning of 2021, and things started to turn around quite a bit at the end of that year into 2022. At mid-March 2022, I took a trip over to Europe because I had a concept. The concept was to go and see some of the micro brands that I really enjoyed. Go and have a chat with them and say, hey, listen, I've got this space in Vancouver. It's absolutely gorgeous. What I'd like to do is to host you for a month and then do rotating hosting. So we'd have one brand for a month. Next month, we'd have another brand, and then another brand, and another brand. Back from that trip, I had a lot of people signed up for doing this. I had pretty much the year covered. And I came in one day, April 11th, to work that morning. Because I'd been away, there was a lot to catch up on. I was just working away. The shop was closed on Mondays anyway, so I could just work peacefully. And then the world kind of caved in. the fire was raging so quickly, and it was very, very evident to me how bad it was going to be. So bad that basically the building was demolished very, very quickly afterwards. To cut a long story short, I had a moment to consider, what was I going to do? I was alone in the store. That feeling, that sense of surrealness and not quite knowing what to do was depicted by Guy Ritchie in Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. One of the characters had sat down at a poker table, had been winning, put everything into the pot, and last hand lost everything. He stood up from the chair thinking that, yeah, he had it in the bag, and the world started to revolve. And the imagery from that movie just stuck with me, right? Because when I was looking around the store at that point, that's what it was. The whole world was spinning. I didn't know what to do first. And then immediately it was just like, oh my God, I've got so many people's watches in for service here. I'm the custodian of that, and I'm responsible. There's no amount of insurance that can pay for, the replacement of family pieces. In one of the safes, we had stock. In a second safe, we had customers' goods. The top half of the safe, so tall, had trays of watches in partial states of disassembly. Then we had some finished pieces, some pieces that had come in for estimates. I just started pulling these things out as fast as I could. Those safes, unfortunately, were in the far back of the store. That was the area that was filling up with smoke most rapidly. I'd never seen smoke enter a room like that. It was coming through the brickwork. So if you can imagine taking a drag on a cigarette, putting a straw in your mouth and blowing, that was the force at which smoke was coming out of the wall from above. So it was, I made a number of trips to get some of those things out. It got so bad that last time I went back in there, I could barely see. My eyes were burning from the smoke. So I just had to leave those trays with disassembled watches in the safe, lock it up, and I ran out as fast as I could to immense chaos on the street. I mean, there were 3 fire engines there dousing the flames that were just not going out. From taking the space over in 2020 to then April 11th, 2022, that was our lifespan over there. There was stuff on top of the benches that I was working on. One of those pieces belonged to James Stacey, was his grandfather's watch. Ironically, his grandfather was a firefighter. The hardest thing for me was phoning him first thing in the morning and trying to tell him this, and I was so cut up. But it wasn't just him, it was all the other people. The safes ended up going through the floor and being partially immersed in water. The amount of water that they were pouring onto the building started filling up the basement. In some places the basement was 5 feet high, in other places it was 7. Water was actually coming up from under the floorboards out onto the street. That's how much water they were putting on, because this fire just wasn't going out. So the whole thing was absolutely horrifying. Everything that I had with regard to tools and everything that I'd collected over the years was all in that building. I was trying to get back in there to get things like James Stacey's watch that I couldn't grab as. And in fact, it was James Stacey and a number of other people like Jason Lim from Heirlooms Watches that started to get the word out to the community as to what happened. The city engineer came up to me and He said, "Are you responsible for blowing up my inbox?" He had hundreds of emails from people from around the world that had heard about this situation. In the end, what ended up happening was they started to demolish the building. Now, my wife and I were out there that day when they started to pull trucks in there. The amount of emotion around that was indescribable, really. And emotions were very, very high, especially when they brought out the biggest crane digger I'd ever seen and started just peeling off the top layers of the building. Once all the floors above had been taken down to the retail level, they would clear a path to the front of each of the stores, and they would allow a team from the demolition team to go in there for 10 minutes. I had a walkie-talkie in my hand. I was trying to direct them to where I thought things were so they could try and bring things out. The water damage was horrible. I was trying to direct them through the walkie-talkie to say, yeah, okay, so if it's still there, there's my benches, in this space, there's some stuff on there. Look, try and be as careful as you can, but just scoop it off of the bench and pop it into a bag. There's a photograph of that a local photographer called Julian Falk had taken at the time, of them coming out with a tray, and that was the tray that had James Stacey's watch. The one thing that they did get, though, which I never thought they would ever pull out, was a clock that was on the wall, and it was my master clock, and that is currently underneath the main table downstairs. I haven't done anything with it, with that clock yet, because the time that's on it is the time that the power was cut to the building. The amount of brick and debris from the demolition was 25 feet high. And so the safes were underneath that. One safe came out about 6 weeks after. So they pulled it out. I went down there as fast as I could, and it was the safe with our stock that was in it. And I was like, oh, no. I didn't care about the stock, right? If I cared about people's heirlooms. Growing up with a jeweler for a father, knowing the value of pieces to people, it was just horrible. And we had to wait nearly 6 months before the other safe was found. I've got that picture on the wall downstairs when it came out. I wasn't very hopeful. Water was coming out of the bottom of it. Just like, the rest of that stuff has to be a write-off. Has to be. That last part, knowing that it's there and what's inside it and what condition is it going to be in, that was intense for Mary and I. And then one day they called me. They said, "Yeah, we haven't opened the door yet, but it's ready to open. So you should come down. You should come down." Like, oh God, like, this is crazy. And they opened it up, and nothing had moved on the top. Nothing had moved. And the only part that had got wet was right up to that top shelf. It ended up being the best case scenario. And I just kind of go, wow, someone was looking out for us. Someone really was. The decision that I made at that time was an important decision, not for me, but for them. And I think that ultimately probably was my dad, right? Giving me some guidance that way. You could have been killed. You could have passed out from that smoke. You're insane. I go, well, oh, thanks. Here's your watch back. And that's what it was. It was things like that to the other end of the scale. One particular person had again an Omega Seamaster that we had just finished working on. It happened to be his father's watch, and his father had died in his arms a few years before, and that was one piece that he remembers being on his dad's wrist, and that was his dad's watch, and he was in tears when he got it back. Both safes out, and then it was okay, we're in rebuilding mode at the end of 2022. It took forever to replace the equipment. At the end of COVID, the supply chains were still broken in 22. The best person I think I could have been dealing with in Germany that saw our plight, that really did help, and that was Bico Technic and Marek Birkenstock. Insurance was nowhere near settled, so that was all out-of-pocket expenses. So we went deep into our lines of credit. Small business is not easy. So then, hearing about tariffs and things like that, they worry me, but when I start to get concerned, I look back at what we've gone through, and then I sort of go, this too will pass. So this is why Roldorf is a place that you can go into and there's no pretense there. You know, a lot of external factors that have made Roldorf what it is today. I can't take credit for it because it's a whole bunch of people, right? It's the people that have worked for me in the past. It's the people that are currently working for me. It's my wife as well, who has a massive role in the company. Choosing people that I really trust and I can really get along with makes the job a whole lot easier. And them trusting me in what my vision is the other part of it. I had found this place in May downstairs. Here it was, as you can see, you know, boutique businesses, so no drama. A little bit off the beaten track. So I like to think of us now as a horological speakeasy. It's a terrible tale in some ways. It's a tale of hardships for small businesses and what it's like to be independent. But it's also a tale of resiliency, because I've got to say, if it wasn't for the people around us at that time helping us through that, and my wife and my resiliency to getting through this, once we had made that decision that we were going to move forward, it was the community that was so behind us, that with their outpouring, that really gave us that boost to make the decision to go. What an amazing thing it was the other night for both Mary and I, when we had that after party with the Grey NATO and Marathon Watches, to see so many people, from brand reps and owners to just people that know of us, that want to see them, want to see us, want to see the store. It was an affirmation. We did the right thing.